So, someone had asked me to talk about Afghanistan, and before I start sounding like a know it all, let me just tell you that I don't know anything. I've never been to Afghanistan. I don't think I've ever even met anyone from Afghanistan. Sorry, Afghanistan. Most of you won't get the joke, but that's all right. Granted, just because you can pronounce or make an attempt to pronounce the name of a country or a people correctly doesn't necessarily mean you know anything. But if you haven't even taken the time to do that, do you really know anything? Hey, maybe you just have a problem with pronouncing foreign words, and maybe you're an expert on the place otherwise. But, I think there's some truth to that. Because lately, what I've been seeing, and I'm going to, again, try not to be that, I've been seeing a lot of, experts, English speaking, Anglo experts on Afghanistan, and everybody knows exactly what's going on and blah, 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 blah. But they can't even fucking pronounce, or they don't even make an attempt. I'm not saying I'm saying it correctly, but they don't even make an attempt to learn how maybe those people like to call themselves. Even though that was the USSR that did all that. Oh, well, did I just expose myself as a hypocrite? Maybe. Anyway, so at the risk of sounding like a know-it-all, when I first heard about this whole pullout, the first thing that came to mind was China's taking over, right? Why did I think that? Well, because Afghanistan it just happens to be on the ancient Silk Road, right? It was one of the places on that road, and they benefited a lot from it throughout history, right? It wasn't always this country full of cave dwellers and pastoralists or whatever the hell have you, right? The way it's painted today. And it still isn't exactly just that, but that's kind of, the image we have of Afghanistan these days. And it's more or less on this new proposed Silk Road today. Now, one of the proposed trajectories, I guess, if you will, one of these projected roads, or one projection of this new Silk Road that I saw, makes a little, semicircle around Afghanistan from China. But, that was maybe before China had the kind of influence that it has today. And why wouldn't they want to, take advantage of a potentially huge customer base in Kabul, let's say, right? Or why wouldn't they want to cut through Afghanistan in more of a straight line and go to Pakistan or any of the ports in that part of the region, right? Why wouldn't they want to make that road shorter? So, just like I speculated that a lot of the conflicts, let's say in Ukraine, Belarus, all around there, some of that has to do with the fact that they're on that same road, right? I think the same can be said about Afghanistan, but it really isn't that simple when it comes to, be it Afghanistan or Ukraine or Belarus. As with most things in life, definitely in, the political arena. And I don't really give a shit about politics, guys. I haven't watched any left wing or right wing media reports on this stuff. I don't know what the mainstream narrative is, apart from the fact that supposedly you got all these Taliban who can barely operate bumper cars, right? Have never seen ice cream in their life, it would seem, and definitely don't know how to do lat pull downs. all of a sudden, I'm supposed to believe those people are flying Black Hawk helicopters, right? So yeah, that's the mainstream narrative. Hilarious. But as you know, it tends to be with this political strife, no matter the region, you know, there are a lot of different parties involved, a lot of different agendas. So the reasons why things may be happening, you know, it's all multifactorial, right? There are a lot of different reasons why Afghanistan is being oppressed by, be it the left or the right, why they're fighting, excuse me, for control over that region, right? Same could be said about, you know, the East and the West fighting over Crimea or Ukraine. So I thought it was interesting when the whole thing with that thing started and people all over the world were panicking. I thought it was interesting that the Taliban were basically all in on the scam, right? They were begging for ventilators and help and, you know, asking for equipment, so on and so forth, right? They were dealing with a huge crisis. That told me, as if I didn't already know, what side they were on, right? The communists. And okay, maybe I'm not using the term correctly, but what I mean by that is authoritarians, people who, well, hate freedom, your freedom, obviously. They want to subjugate other people to their whims and, you know, to control other people. So, you know, this whole narrative you hear about, oh, we need to go into the Middle East or Afghanistan because they don't let women drive, blah, blah, blah. Well, I mean, who put Taliban in power? Who sponsored Taliban over there in Afghanistan, for example, right? Well, who did? Well, the West and China, right? Communists! As I've stated in the past many times, Karl Marx was a Westerner, okay? And that whole thing you saw happening with communism in Russia or USSR, well, that was all controlled by the West. Mao was, you know, a friend to Western imperialists and magnates, if you will, right? Western corporations. He was a friend to them, and you know they've had a very beneficial relationship, right? Peddling China's crap to their people, basically, right? Disenfranchising them, destroying their productive capacity, their manufacturing base, selling them planned obsolescence, right? Crap that didn't last very long, and sending all their purchasing power to China. And now China has the American people by the balls. I don't know why it's so difficult for a lot of people to understand how, you know, China is taking over the world, whether you like it or not. This is pretty clear to see, whether it be, you know, 5G or this thing that's, you know, well, you know, I mean, it's just so obvious, isn't it? It should be. Anyway, I think a lot of people are too nationalistic or too brainwashed by the ideology of capitalism, which is just one step away from communism, really, to be able to see what's actually going on, right? Because the false dialective of us versus them, or, you know, capitalism versus communism, is deeply embedded in their worldview. And, you know, it really is just a bunch of bullshit. Not to really keep repeating myself, but for those of you who don't know my view on capitalism and how it is that it is, just, you know, communism is a natural progression of capitalism. Let me explain. And, you know, by communism, again, I mean tyranny. How about it? Well, I mean, first of all, capitalism, right? And let's define that real quick. Where all, right, unfettered capitalism, pure capitalism, where all means of production are privately owned, is incongruent with natural human rights, right? It's incongruent with natural law, right? Because a lion in the jungle, or a zebra in the, well, savannah, I guess, when that animal is hungry, naturally it will eat, right? Us human beings, because of capitalism, if we want to eat, well, we can't, right? Because, well, every single piece of property is privately owned, and you need to buy that apple or pig that is raised on that land from someone else. You no longer have your natural born right to own land without, paying someone to get access to it, with them dictating what you can actually do there or what you can't do there, right? So while you've had these so-called pro-natural right capitalists, which is a fucking oxymoron if I've ever heard one, a huge contradiction, and one of the funniest incoherences with this whole capitalist worldview. While you had these so-called natural rights, natural human rights loving capitalists, what they've been telling you forever is that, what they've been telling you forever, I should have gotten some water to drink, is that, well, human rights are incompatible with private property, right? This whole mantra that I've ridiculed so many different times, that, YouTube or whatever have you is a private company. Thus, within their jurisdiction, there's no such thing as human rights, such as free speech, right? You don't have free speech because YouTube is a private company. And, as I've told you many, many times over already, well, in a system that's unfettered capitalism, where all means of production, and land being the most important one, are privately owned, it's only a matter of time before certain groups of people, families or whatever have you, accumulate so much land that there isn't any land left for the rest of us, right? And just because you get to live on a piece of property while paying taxes to somebody, you're only really renting. You don't own the land, obviously, because if you owned it, you wouldn't have to pay anybody, right? And what can you do on that land without permission? Some places, nothing. And it's really just a matter of being able to enforce what people can and cannot do, or not being able to enforce these things just yet, why you still have what appears to be like relative freedom. But fundamentally, you don't have any freedom anywhere that is privately owned, right? You're just getting privileges, or you're not being told, not yet anyway, what you can and cannot do on this land that you are renting from someone else. The whole world isn't exactly like that, but this is why we find ourselves in Afghanistan, right? So basically, in a world where all means of production, in a capitalist system where all means of production are privately owned, ultimately, as time passes, more and more land ownership is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, right? And I mean, the people that look to control everybody, the authoritarians, the commies, right? Obviously, what they're going to do is take advantage of this capitalist system and hoard all the land that they can hoard, so they can tell people what to do. Look at Bill Gates buying up all this farmland in the United States, right? That's exactly what's happening. So then we find ourselves in a place like Afghanistan or the Middle East, at least in the past. And those places aren't fully incorporated just yet, right? They're not part of the corporation. So people there have been living very similarly to how we have always lived, right? Raising animals, growing their own food, just going on the land, building a house without asking for permission, right? If they wanted to own a tank or a Kalashnikov, no one could tell them otherwise, right? They were essentially free people. So that's what you had in Afghanistan. You may not like how they live, right? Or you might not approve of their lifestyle, but you can't tell me that they didn't enjoy freedom. Now, we could sit back and bicker about women's rights or something along those lines, but that conversation is dead to me. Uh, it's not really one that I would want to engage in, but maybe. But I'll say this much about it. Look, this whole idea that women can't drive in Afghanistan, well, that was really, from what I understand, that was brought about by the communist Taliban, right? I don't think they ever had that law on the books prior to the Taliban. Now, culturally, the people there aren't cool with women driving, but that's a whole different video. I don't really feel like getting into, because you could make a very good argument for why there's nothing wrong with that, or at the very least, I'd like to hear some arguments. You have to tell me why that's wrong before you could convince me that it is, right? And if you're going to come over here and say, well, women in Afghanistan should drive, and I'm not saying I believe this or that, right? I'm just saying, what's the argument, right? Before you start murdering innocent people in Afghanistan because women can't drive, I mean, first, shouldn't you have to explain to me and convince me and everybody else why that's somehow not okay, right? And if you're saying, well, women should be able to drive because Western women can, well, then on the contrary, I could say maybe Western women shouldn't be driving because women in Afghanistan can't, right? And if you're not going to accept that argument, then you have to be okay with me not accepting yours, because it's essentially the same argument. Now, if you want to say, well, women should be able to drive because they're equal to men, well, I mean, that argument clearly has been debunked millions and millions and millions of times over. So, needless to say, they're not equal, okay? Now, I'm not saying that's a justification for why they shouldn't drive, right? And I'm okay with women driving. Most women anyway, just as I am okay with most men driving. But all that I am saying is that you haven't actually made an argument for why they shouldn't. That's all I'm saying, right? This whole equality, that doesn't work. That's not a very good argument. And this whole thing, they should do things the way we do, well, obviously that's not a good argument either. But, this whole idea that somehow we need to go in there and murder innocent people to give them freedom and democracy, it's like, well, why? Because some women in that society are compelled to, however that actually happens, and a lot of them want to do this, but a portion of the women in that society are compelled to cover their faces. That's why we should go in there and murder innocent people. When when in these so-called free societies, everybody is forced to wear face coverings. Oh, I guess we should go in there to give them equality, right? We should force everybody to wear face coverings. Is that the kind of equality you're talking about? Yeah, well, maybe you're not, but that's essentially where this is headed, what this is about, right? Medical burqa for everybody, something I talked about already, right? So, just because equality, right, doesn't equal freedom, in other words. Right? You're going to all be equally oppressed now. Whereas, I'm not saying that I agree with the way they do things over there. Again, I don't know anything about that society, right? I don't see like women in large protesting this. They seem to be all right with having to cover their face. Whatever, right? But, if you're going to complain about that, well, I mean, take a goddamn look in the mirror, right? This is what equality gets you. Everybody's oppressed if you think some of the women in Afghanistan are, right? Right? So basically, what has to happen with places like Afghanistan, they have to be brought into the fold, right? They have to be incorporated, and freedom has to be eradicated so that you in the Western world, who has been brainwashed with this idea of freedom, when in reality, you were never really free, except for, select few of you, you have to believe that freedom is slavery, right? So to give those people, those shepherds or goat herders or farmers or whatever have you, free people in Afghanistan, right? To bring them freedom and democracy, we have to muzzle all of them, not just some of the women, right? But everybody, basically. We have to sell them crappy Chinese goods and destroy whatever, little manufacturing base they may have there, or their productivity, right? Afghanistan, from what I understand, is a pretty agriculturally heavy country, and they produce a lot of food, right? You can't control the people without controlling the food, right? That's part of how you take over, the whole world. You have to take control of natural resources, energy, right? Food, energy for the human robots, and you have to take control of people's minds, right? So what people in Afghanistan are going to get now is TVs for everybody, cell phones for everybody, internet for everybody, and they're gonna, be brainwashed to become like the rest of the Western world, basically, right? They're gonna do away with their tradition and the freedom that comes with all of that, and they're going to bribe them to basically become NPCs, just like the rest of the world, right? And again, they're also in the, they're located between China and Europe, or Asia and Europe, two of the biggest markets on the economies on the planet. And it's good to be able to control those people so that it's not them who reap the benefits of the trade that takes place also on their soil. It's so that you reap as much of the benefits of the things that you as China produce and want to sell all over the world, right? So these people will no longer benefit. It'll look to them maybe like they're benefiting because they're gonna get a bunch of cheap Chinese goods that are sold to them as something special and beautiful and so advanced and progressive, like i.e. cell phones, which is really just going to be used to brainwash and demoralize these people. So they may see it as getting a good deal, but that's because they may not be able to understand what's actually happening. So again, geographically speaking, Afghanistan is positioned in a very strategically important, not just from economic standpoint, but also national defense or whatever have you, insofar as China's concerned, right? If they could put their military bases further out from where their manufacturing bases, right, kind of like the Great Wall of China, maybe, they could have that little buffer zone that they control in the case, of war or in foreign invasion or whatever have you, right? So it's just imperialism, right? It's about controlling other people, controlling their countries, destroying their sovereignty, so that they're just a republic and they're just a vassal state to you, right? This is nothing but imperialism and the eradication of sovereignty, freedom, and the ongoing demoralization of the people you want to control, brainwash, and probably also depopulate to a certain degree, right? So that they are no longer a threat to you, right? You want to neuter all these savages who are really, hard, tough people, and they can fight, right? So yeah, that's more or less what's going on. The Democrats have made no qualms about it. Biden has made no qualms about it. They're all pro-China. They basically, from what I see, gave China the green light to go into Taliban by proxy, right? First by proxy because, that's kind of a friendly face to a lot of the Afghans, not all of them, right? And little by little, these people are going to be replaced with overseers with slightly more slanted eyes, right? A lot of them are going to get brainwashed and they're going to get sold the Chinese agenda. And a lot of them will eventually be replaced by, the foreign invaders. This is just the way warfare is conducted these days, right? It's mostly economic and kind of covert, I guess you would say, right? By proxy. So yeah, Afghanistan is basically being brought into the communist fold, and the empire, the communist empire, is just expanding. That's it. That's my view on it. Again, I don't know shit, But from everything that I've heard, this is the best picture I could paint for you. It's just my opinion. Oh, and one last thing. It's an ancient land. From around there is where civilization came from. It's where white people trace their origins back to. Around that whole area, there's a lot of ancient wisdom, knowledge, could be potentially even ancient technology buried, hidden, so on and so forth. So that's also part of it, right? There's definitely going to be archaeological digs going on, and China looking for ancient technology, ancient wisdom, and not allowing, just as with the pyramids all over China, not allowing public access to these sites, but looking to learn as much as possible and advance their own agenda by using ancient knowledge, ancient secrets, ancient technology, to using that for their benefit, right? And keeping that secret. A la, again, like what they're doing with the pyramids, or what like Vatican has been doing with ancient manuscripts, for example, right? That's that sort of thing. So yeah, that's another, albeit somewhat smaller piece of the puzzle here, in my opinion. All right. So yeah, again, that's my view on Afghanistan and the global Chinese communist takeover, with a lot of allies in your Western governments supporting them, basically, be it EU or the Democratic Party and a large portion of the Republicans in the United States as well. All right. That's the way I see it. Thank you for listening.